before I kind of get started and build on some of the techniques that we talked about in the past classes. Remember in Premiere that Premiere is sourcing your files right here. So when you save your Premiere project, it's linking all of these footage files right here. So what that means is that when you start your project, make sure that you create a directory by just going right-clicking and going New Folder. And it's good to stay organized in here. So I named mine Premiere Demo because I'm demoing Premiere here. And you can see I made a folder in there for audio where just any audio files that I needed, like your voiceover, for instance, I would put in the audio folder. For footage, I'm putting all my footage folders in here, and I'm just keeping it organized. And if you remember, if I take one of my footage files and I move it out of that folder, like onto my desktop, Premiere is going to lose it, and the file's going to become unlinked. So you want to just kind of keep things, create a directory and keep things in there and try not to move them around once they're in there. So I kind of started off the project by creating those 3 folders between audio, footage, and stills. And then when I kind of first created my project, my Premiere project, remember I named it Demo Version 1, and I saved it into the same folder directory right here. And when I saved my first Premiere project, which is a PRPROJ file, it generates this folder automatically that has autosaves. So if Premiere crashes, you can kind of go to one of those autosaves right there. And so hopefully your project will look something like this, right? Where you have a project directory, you keep your files in there. And again, I demonstrated this in one of the earlier classes where I just took one of these footage files right here and I moved it just simply out of this directory onto my desktop. And if you remember, we got the footage turned into, it turned into like a colored screen that said media is missing and all the different languages right there. And if you ever have that problem where you're missing footage right here, is the way to fix it is you just find the footage in your project window down here. So let's say it's the C61 file right here. You can just right-click on it and go down to replace footage right here. So you just right-click on it in the project directory if it's missing, and you just go down to replace footage right here, and you'll relink the footage together in this window. So you'll try to locate it again and then link it back in Premiere, and hopefully Premiere will be able to find it. But again, if you just don't move it, that shouldn't happen to you. So kind of recapping some other just kind of important basic things here is, remember, you can change your workspaces up here. We have, and whenever I change my workspace, this window layout changes. So just remember, if your screen looks different than mine, don't worry about it. Just remember the main folders that were the names of the panels that we're dealing with, and the main panels are the project directory right here. We have the main visual of the sequence right here, and we got the timeline, and then we've got our basic tools down here. And let's see here. So we've kind of talked about most of what you need to kind of get rolling with this program, right? So we introduced the tools. Hopefully everyone's familiar with the cut tool and the main selection tool at this point. Remember, the shortcuts for those are C for the cut tool and V for the main selection tool right there. And most of the editing that you're going to want to do, you can do with those 2 tools. There's some other tools in here that can be useful, but we'll bring those in later in the semester, and you actually don't really need them in order to get by. It's really just those main 2 tools right there. There's the additional tool, the type tool, which I introduced in last class, and you can reference back to the video on how you can use that tool, but it's T, and it's this tool right here. And you can see when I use it, it creates a new layer above my other visual layers right here. And let's see here. If you recall, to make any panel full screen, you can press, it's called the tilde button right next to the number 1 on the Mac keyboard. And if you just hover your cursor, it'll make it full screen right there. And that's that layer right there. and kind of bringing things back to where we're going to be going today. Two really helpful shortcuts to kind of get used to, and there's buttons for them right here, is the mark in, the mark out, and then the go to mark in, and then the go to the mark out button right here. And so those buttons right there pertain to this gray bar, which you can also set by pressing, just moving your cursor to where you want the endpoint to be and pressing I, moving your cursor to where you want the out point to be and press O. And then if you press, if your cursor is over here and you want to go directly to the endpoint, just Shift and I. And if you want to go to the out point, Shift and O. And so there's two purposes for this. Again, is when you're editing, when I press spacebar, which is the shortcut for the play button, you can see it's always just marching forward right here on the timeline, like when I press stop and start right here. And so you can set your mark in and out point so that you can focus on editing a certain area of your film right here. So let's just say I really want to focus on the transition from the plant to the can right there. Is I just press I to set the in point and O for the out point. And so now when I press play and it goes way past it, I don't have to manually move my cursor around. I can just quickly press Shift and I and go right back to the point and kind of keep studying my edit right here. So those shortcuts will get you a really long way in terms of editing. And just reviewing a little bit more is the most of the time cuts are what you're going to want to do, but sometimes you're going to want to do a transition like a cross dissolve or a dip to black. And the main way to do that is through effects. And so you can go you can customize and make your own window right here, or you can just go to effects right here. And so this is going to change my layout. And if you remember, you'll have an effects window right here. We have video transitions. You can open that down to dissolves. And under here, if I want this to cross dissolve from the plant to the can, all you have to do is you just click on the effect and then you drag it down to the video layer that you want to affect. And you can see right now it's going to cross dissolve between both layers, and you can see it turns kind of brown in the region between on both clips. But if you drag it a little bit to the left, it'll generally only affect the clip on the left, and if you drag it all the way to the right, it'll only affect the clip on the right. But that kind of depends on what effect that you're using. A cross dissolve, by its definition, is cross dissolving between two pieces of footage, so it's going to kind of do the same thing. This particular effect is going to do the same thing no matter where I drag it right here. But you just drag it right there. It creates this middle bar right here. I'll press the plus button to zoom in a little bit. Plus and minus are good shortcuts for zooming in and out. And you can see the duration of this, it creates this brown box right here, and however long that brown box is however long the your cross dissolve is going to be. So I'll press Shift I to go back, and if I want that to be a little bit shorter, I just hold my cursor right to the right, and it'll do a red bracket, and I can either make it shorter for a quick cross dissolve like this, so it'll be pretty rapid, or I can just click it and then drag it so it's longer, so that'll be a longer cross dissolve right there. So it'll become more of a gradual cross dissolve at that point. To get rid of any effects, you just click on the box that's right there that it creates, then you press delete, and then you got it right there. So that brings us up to today, mostly up to today here. And another thing I want to show you all is how to create an adjustment layer right here. So all this footage that you see right here, and this is something I'll talk about a little bit more, is shot in something called S-Log. And what S-Log is in film is whenever you shoot footage on certain cameras, and most cameras that we rent out here I don't think do this, but it's just good to know what it is, where you look at this footage and it's a little bit, there's not a lot of contrast to it. And the reason for that is it's a lot easier to add the contrast in later. And if you shoot footage that has a ton of contrast on it when it's shot, it's really hard to kind of pull the colors out of it. So with a lot of, I don't know why this HDMI keeps cutting out. So with a lot of cameras, they shoot in S-Log, and that helps the color correctionists have a lot more room to maneuver when they're editing things here. So that's just kind of the reason this footage looks that way. And sometimes, I mean, it's kind of a nice look, you know, so a lot of the times people just kind of go with it. But so something you can do in Premiere is you can color correct. And so let's just say that I have this piece of footage right here. You can go over, so I have it selected, so you can see that video clip right there is highlighted white right there. And if I go over to, it's called Lumetri Color right here. So notice that I'm under the Effects tab right here. And then I go under Lumetri Color right here. We have these options. And anyone who's kind of like color corrected a photo before you upload it onto Instagram or something like that is, I mean, kind of a version of that. So again, just to kind of show what I'm doing here is you do it by one clip at a time right here, because when you're color correcting, your footage might be a little different from one shot to the next. So you kind of have to do it, or you don't have to do it, but by its default, you do it shot by shot right here. So I have shot 1 of the plant, shot 2 of the can, and then shot 3 of the synthesizer. Technically, these 2 shots between the plant and the can were the same shot, and I remember I just edited between them. So just to make this a little more simple, I'm just going to delete that so that we have less to look at right here. So I have the footage of the can selected, and then I'm under my effects workspace right here. And if you don't see an effects workspace, you can click on here and maybe on these arrows and it might show up for you. And if an effects window panel still doesn't show up for you, you just go up to Windows and then go to Effects right there. So whenever you're not seeing a window, and whenever I'm showing something like Premiere and After Effects, and you're looking for the window that I'm using and you're not seeing it, just go up to Window and see if you can find it up in this menu right here, and it should come up for you right there. And so I have this Coke can selected right here, and there's kind of under Lumetri Color, this is where you can do a lot of your color correction. And within this, oops, my thing slipped here. There's there's kind of 2 tabs. There's a bunch of tabs, but 2 main ones that I want to talk about, which is the basic correction right here. And then there's the creative correction directly beneath it right there. And so basic correction is going to be really helpful. Do you guys remember when I was talking about white balance? So this footage should be pretty white balanced, hopefully. But if footage is not white balanced, it might come in on your camera looking like that, where it's a little bit blue, or it might come in looking like that, where it's a little bit warm. And you can tell if something's white balanced by if you have a white object in your scene. So this pot is more or less white. It's a little bit of a gray in real life. It should be like a neutral color right there. And so what basic color correction is you're trying to get all your colors to their natural point. And then once you have your basic correction on, then you can get to your creative color correction, where if you want it to look like a, have more like extreme contrast, like a Tim Burton movie or like an action movie or something like that, you can kind of add that kind of creative flair in. So kind of going over the basics of this right here, we have this, so we're under Lumetri Color, and we're under the basic correction panel right here. I have this footage of the lime soda selected. And one thing you can do is if you have an object that you think is a white object in your scene, you can actually click on this color picker, and you can see this little eyedropper comes up, and you can do an eyedropper in the area, and it'll calculate. I don't know if you see it, but some of these numbers jumped right here in the color temperature. So let me press Edit Undo. So it starts at 0, 0. And then when I do the eyedropper, it tries to figure out on its own. Oops, let's see if it'll play along with me here. There we go. It'll try to pick what it thinks is a color correct version right there. So if you have like a white keyboard or something like that is white, this eyedropper can be a really helpful tool. Otherwise, you kind of need to manually pull these sliders. So kind of use your eyes to find to get the colors neutral here. And again, when I say making the color neutral, what I mean by that is just so if you have a white object, it looks white instead of blue or orange in your scene. And so these two sliders will help you kind of set your color temperature and correct anything if it's a little bit wrong one way or the other right here. And one thing that's super important is just these monitors in this lab, I think, are going to be pretty good, but just make sure that your computer is calibrated, meaning that like when you look at a video on your computer, it seems like it's relatively accurate right here. So you can see right here, if I'm trying to correct this footage, at least on my screen right now, it looks good, but if it was anything, it would need to just be like a shade cooler right here. So this slider right there brings it cool, warm. Generally speaking, hopefully it comes into your camera. What's best is it's really easy to color to white balance on your camera. Remember, most of these cameras have like an auto white balance, which will just basically do it for you here. So these sliders here are just in case it kind of a piece of footage slipped through and you need to correct it right there. So the second slider, this one makes it a little more orange and this makes it a little more magenta. And typically you'll just kind of set these to what you want right here. Going through these right here, we have exposure, which you can see right here is kind of like if you on a camera took your f-stop and boosted up the aperture a whole lot right here. It just brightens the image a lot if you bring it up, and then if you bring it down, it darkens the image right there. So if your footage is too dark or too bright, this can be a good one to start with. Whenever on these sliders right here, notice that I have it brought up right there. If I just double click on this dot right here, it brings it back to neutral right there. So I just bring it up, double click, it's back to neutral. We have contrast, which is if I bring it up, you can see the darks get darker and the brights get brighter right there. And then if I bring it down, it gets a little more grayed out right there. So if you need more contrast, that's that slider right there. Highlights. If you look specifically in these areas, these specular highlights that are on the can right here, if you boost up highlights, they'll get brighter. And then if you bring it down, it kind of neutralizes that a little bit. Shadows is, if you bring it up, the shadows get brighter. If you bring it down, the shadows get darker. Again, I'll double click to neutralize it. Whites, you can see, especially right here in this highlight, if I bring it up, it blows it out. And then if I bring it down, it kind of, again, neutralizes things. And then blacks, if I just bring this down, this is the final slider right here in this section. If I bring that down, I'll just make the areas, like if you look specifically in this area of the can where there's no light coming in, right there, it goes from an almost black to a full black right there as I move that slider down. Yes?
What would happen if you cranked everything all the way up?
Let's see it. Let's see here. It's probably not going to be good. Let's see. So there we go. And so right here, and again, just double clicking to bring it back. And one thing that's really challenging, so there's people who do, one of my best friends is a color correctionist for TV and film, and this is all he does, is this job right here. I mean, this gets 1,000 times more complicated than what I'm showing right now, but where their job is to take footage that's being shot on set and then to do this first step right here where you're trying to just color balance everything so that it looks kind of neutral. So if I were doing this, the temperature is pretty good. I might just kind of start dialing in. It always takes me a minute to actually do it correctly, so it just kind of depends a little bit on the style that you're going for, things like that. But you can just kind of, just making like adjustments to the sliders just to kind of get this into like a nice neutral setting right there. Because remember I said that this footage was shot on something called S-Log on this camera, meaning that the contrast is like a little dimmed down. That's usually not going to be the case with most of the cameras that you'll be renting out right here, but especially on cameras that use S-Log, you'll need to kind of do this step for sure just to kind of get things started. So you can also see right here, there's this little check button right here. So this is a nice little, I call it A-being, meaning you have version A and you have version B. And when you use the term A-being, it means you're comparing A and B quickly together. So I just did like a real quick, just move the sliders to make some adjustments right here. And so this is it before, so I had this little checkbox, I turned it off. And then this is it with it on. So this is the footage as it came in, and this is it with just like a few kind of more minor adjustments just to kind of fix things up a little bit right here. So most of the time, this is what you're going to be kind of messing with, just to kind of, you kind of want your footage to look the same across the board, right? So you want to make it so when you're editing, one shot doesn't look yellow, and then the next shot looks blue, you know, within the same environment. You want them to kind of look close to one another. And so this is, let's see here, kind of like the basic color correction right there. And then we have the creative section right here, where you can kind of get into some kind of more creative areas of color correcting right here. And this is something that you can kind of just mess with here a little bit to get comfortable with. The main one I want you to become familiar with, though, is the basic correction, just so that like the footage looks, you learn to get the footage to look neutral. And then once we get that, we can kind of, if you feel comfortable with that, you can start kind of diving into these other controls right here. If you go into the creative controls right here, if you go under look right here, so there's this little tab called look, you can find some presets under there. So let me just kind of click on one. Oops, did an autosave right as I was doing it. So you can see right there, I clicked on one. So you kind of do your basic correction first to kind of get things neutral, and then you can find these presets right here that, so if I do matrix green right there, for instance, like it really, you know, this is where you kind of start to add your creative looks to it if you want it to have like a stylized look right here. So we have these looks right here, which are presets, and you can kind of start with those, or you can just go to none up here and start dialing these in manually with the controls that are all below here. So we have things like faded film, which just kind of fades out the contrast, sharpen vibrance and saturation, which is actually really similar to what you might see on an iPhone when you're kind of doing something, uploading a photo on Instagram, where it kind of brightens the saturation, brightens the vibrance, brightens the sharpen right there.
What's the difference between vibrance and saturation?
So it's a subtle difference. So saturation right here is it takes the hues of your scene, and if you bump it up, it'll become really, like the colors will become more saturated. And if you bring it down here, it'll go to black and white right there.
Yeah.
And then vibrance is, it just behaves like a little bit differently. It's, what's the best way to say this?
Is it like more variety the colors, or?
It's, let's do a little example right here. So I have the vibrance right here set all the way up right there, and then I'll double click it, and I have the saturation set all the way up. So the saturation is, in this instance right here, the saturation kind of brought the colors in the table and in the can and just brought everything up a little bit. And then vibrance, you can see right here, is a little more relegated to this can in this particular instance right here. So there's probably like I'm probably not doing it justice here with what I'm saying.
Vibrance more like focuses on the already colorful aspects of the
Right.
scene.
Yeah.
While saturation just turns up everything.
Yeah, that's my general like understanding of it right there for sure. And so continuing to move through this, we have some other ones that you can kind of experiment with right here. So curves, for anyone who's really familiar with Photoshop and some programs like that, can be really helpful, is we have this white dot right here is just the overall brightness and contrast of it. And this bar right here is we have the lights up here, we have the darks down here, and we can click and make points on this line to exaggerate it right here. So this line right here is darks, this line right here is brights. If you want to make an area of the darks darker, you click right here and you just bring that down right there, and that makes the darks darker. But if I leave this neutral right here, the brights remain more or less untouched. But if I want the darks to be brighter, I can just click that up, and you can see that only the darks are being affected really, but you have to kind of draw this curve so that it remains neutral in the other areas. So again, we have the darks down here, If I bring this up, the darks will get brighter. If I bring it down, the darks will become darker. Same for the midtones right here. So if I click this up, the midtones will get a little bit brighter in there. Bring it down, the midtones will get darker. And then same for the brights up here. If I bring it up right here, the highlights get brighter. And if I bring it down, the highlights will get darker right there. So if you keep your eyes on the highlights right there, and this is obviously really exaggerated what I'm doing right here. And you can get rid of these just by double clicking on one of the dots right there, and it'll reset. A really common way to do this, probably the most common way, is what's called an S-curve right here. And usually people do it, you have to look at your footage. This projector is also blowing this out more than what's actually happening on my screen, because these projectors are never totally accurate. But a lot of times you'll kind of do like a little S-curve like this, and what that'll do is just darken your darks, brighten your brights a little bit right there. And you can also, if you click on these dots right here, we have red, green, and blue. Remember, so all footage is divided into red, green, and blue, and so you can take like your red channel right here and start, like, if I bring it all the way down, the reds will get removed, and if I bring this up, the reds will get like blasted right there. So this is kind of a little bit more of an advanced tool right here. And I would encourage you probably not to mess with the RGBs on this one quite yet until you get more familiar with things. But this first curve right here with the brightness and contrast can be helpful if you want to add a little boost into this thing. So last thing I want to go over in this Lumetri color, at least in this lesson right here, is the vignette. So if you want a little bit of a vignette right here, that's this last tab right here. So you can just do the amount right there. And we have, if I brought it to 3, it gives us like a white vignette. And then if I bring it down to -3, it does like more of what you would imagine typically with a vignette, with a darker vignette right there. So you can do that. The midpoint changes the range of it right here. So by its default, it's kind of set to something that looks pretty natural. But if I drag it all the way up, it's very subtle. And then if I drag it all the way down, that's way too much, and that looks kind of silly right there. The roundness, so right now the vignette's a little square. So the vignette's creating more of a square shape right here. If I pull this slider up, then it's square this way. Let me see if I can change this. And then it rounds out in the middle, and then kind of changes shape to like more of an oblong rectangle over there. And then feathering is the amount. So if I have the feather down to 0, it's going to be a sharp line right there in the vignette. If I bring it all the way up, it's going to be very feathered. That's a term that's used a lot in a lot of digital media. And so whenever you see a hard line like that, it's just referred to as a hard line. But if you want to feather it, you add like a blur to it a little bit and kind of fade it and make it more gradual right here. So these are the controls that you can use to create a vignette in your footage. It's the bottom of the Lumetri Color right here. You can just double click to neutralize things again. And usually just like a little bit, if I'm doing it, I'm just taking the amount, bringing it down to like -1 or something like that, just for something subtle. And remember, with all these effects, you can turn them off and on right here with these check marks right there. So so we can see right here we have the Coke can, which is kind of a little bit corrected as I was talking right there. So you can see the color kind of got livened up a little bit. And then this footage, I haven't done it yet, and it's just a little more grayed out right there. That's kind of some of the basics of color correction right there. One other thing I want to show here on this is you can apply it to the clip directly, or you can do that to, you can add effects to what's called an adjustment layer if you want to affect multiple clips at the same time. So to create an adjustment layer, for anyone who's interested in doing that, is I'm going to create a layer that goes on video layer 2 right here, and it's going to, whatever effects I add to the adjustment layer, which is going to go right here, will affect anything that's underneath it right here. So if I go to, is this button right here where my cursor is, it's called New Item. It's in the project window, or the project panel right here, and it's this little button right here called New Item. So you'll click on it, and you can see we have these options right here where we have several new items that we can create. Like I could make a new sequence, And there's a few other things right here that are a little less common, but you can see the option for creating an adjustment layer is right here, and I'll click it. And it's just going to ask me, do I want this to have the same settings as the rest of my sequence? The answer is always going to be yes on this, so just press OK. And you can see an adjustment layer is created right there. And to add it into my scene, all I have to do is just click it and just drag it into my scene right here. And the way the adjustment layer works is whatever effect I put on this adjustment layer will affect anything that's happening underneath it right here. So I could do that for color correction. If I have a bunch of shots that I know need the exact same color correction, meaning they were shot at the same time as one another, things like that. But just to kind of show the adjustment layer as clearly as I can, I'll add an effect that's a little more, let's see here, a little more extreme. So let's see here, what's a good one? So you can see right here, I can click and add like the Lumetri Color onto this adjustment layer right here. So I can click on that, and then with this adjustment layer selected right here, I can make adjustments to my to the adjustment layer, and it's going to affect anything that's underneath it right there. But let me again just find an effect that'll be like a little more extreme right here. Let's do, sorry, I'm a little less familiar with some of these other ones. Here we go. So we have Mosaic, which pixelates things. So this is like the most extreme effect I could think of right here. So that's applied to my adjustment layer right here. And you can see it goes from shot 1 to shot 2. But as soon as that adjustment layer ends, it stops doing it. So the adjustment layer is a way that you can add effects to anything that falls underneath it right there. So again, to create the adjustment layer, I just press this little button right here. It creates a new adjustment layer in my project window. You can just click it and then drag it into your scene right here. Add an effect to it, and then it'll affect anything that happens underneath it within the scene right there. So let me just delete that. Does anyone have any questions about the adjustment layer or color correction in general for the basic correction? Okay. So final thing I want to show today, sorry this went a little longer than I thought it would, is how to export your videos. So a lot of y'all's interfaces are going to look a little bit different than mine, but you should be able to do it the same way, whether no matter which version of Premiere you have open here. So remember, this in and out point is really helpful for editing, but it's also the in and out points are how you set the range that you're going to render for your final output. So when you export your final movie. So let's say that this is my movie right here and I want to export it. This area back here is empty, so I don't want to export that. So I just hold Shift and snap it. And you can see that it snaps because a little arrow will show up right there, showing that it snapped to the point where the footage starts right there. If it's not doing that, make sure that snapping is on, which is this button right here. So if that's off, it won't do it. But if that button is on, which it should just be on at all times, it'll snap for you. And I'll press I for endpoint. And then I'll snap it to the out point of or create an out point for my footage by snapping it to the end of my movie right here, pressing O. And so this gray region right here is the region that's going to export out of it's going to export out of Premiere when we export it. So that's set up. And the last thing I need to do is I just go up to File, Export, and then Media right there. So File, Export, and Media. And it'll take 1 second. And it'll come up right here. And so again, it's File, Export, and Media, which again is right. Let me just show that one more time. File, Export, Media right here. And this window will come up. And what we have here is, so we're not going to change too much. Like this should be pretty good by default, especially if you have the sequence set up correctly as like a 1920 by 1080. So the format of H.264 is good right here. For preset, you can see when you click on preset, this is really helpful. What Premiere does here is it gives you a ton of presets you can choose from. So if you plan on exporting something out to like Twitter, for example, like it has presets that, and they update this regularly to format well with whatever these developers want the codec to be. By the way, a codec is a term for the different compression types for QuickTime movies. So that's just, hopefully that will make it so it's less confusing when I say that word. But you can see that there's like Facebook settings. We have some H.264 settings that are, like the high bitrate is the default one right there. So if I were exporting this for like a film festival, I would probably just leave it right where it is. But you can see that there's these other options too. If you're uploading something to Vimeo, for example, I have a Vimeo 1080 and then a YouTube 1080 right there. But generally speaking, if you try to do one of these presets, if you're just make sure that it's matching whatever you worked in, right? So if you're working in 1920 by 1080, what you don't want to do is go click on like a 480 preset right here. That's a bad call to do that. So it's just good to know that those are there, because in the future you might want to just be making a YouTube video and you can just go down to YouTube and make a preset that's going to work really well with their website right there. So with that being said, don't really need to mess with this for what we're doing right here. I just wanted to show you that it's there. So H.264 is good. This is good right here. We can scroll down to right here, which is the output name. So I would encourage you to click on that, and this is going to show you where you're going to export your movie out to. And this can go anywhere. For organization, I might recommend that you make a new folder within your project directory called renders. So I just clicked where it said this button right here. This is new folder, renders, press create, and name it. So I'll just call this, what I'll call this, Premiere Demo _ version 1. When I'm exporting these things, I'd encourage you not to name it like final version 1, final version 2, all that, or sorry, stick with a naming convention that works here. So what I mean by that is, so I have this, what I'm doing right now is I'm premiering demo, so I'm just naming my project, something straightforward. And then just do version 1, version 2, version 3. And that way, if you mess it up and you need to re-render it or something like that, you're not confused about which version you should be using here. So anyway, I just set the location in my project directory under renders and named it and press save. And you can just go ahead and export right here. There's a few things that I typically do just to kind of punch things up, but you can just go and press export right here and I'll export it out. And so just to kind of summarize this real quick, is I set the in and out points. You go to File, you go to Export Media right there. And then you don't really need to change these as long as your sequence settings were set up correctly. You just go here and you set the location. For me, I'm going to put that in a renders folder and name my project, or name what's going to become my QuickTime movie right here. And you can just go straight down to export and it'll export it out. Two buttons that I do a lot just to kind of give it a little bit of a boost is there's this button right here called Use Maximum Render Quality right here. And then under this slider right here, there's Render at Maximum Depth right there. And what these two do is that just kind of gets rid of some of the aliasing and stuff, but that's getting really into the detail of how your movie is going to come out. And that's just kind of, those are two check marks that I like to do just personally here, but it's not required or anything. And so I just go to export and I'll export it out. Depending on the length of your movie, that'll go much shorter or quicker than what we just saw right there. Also, depending on how many effects you put on your project, will set, it'll increase the render time a little bit. But you can see right here, I saved it into my project directory. We're under renders right here. That's the render that I just came up with. Open it up in QuickTime. Always be sure to open it up in QuickTime just to make sure that it came out all right. And you can see we have this piece of footage right here, which has some color correction on it. And then we have the second piece of footage over here, which is as it was shot right there. And it's open up in QuickTime, and it's working out well here. Does anyone have any questions about any of what I showed here today on this demonstration? Cool. So the way that the rest of the class will work here is why don't we go ahead and take a 15-minute break here and meet back at 1:15. And that way, if you need to kind of grab something to work on, you can kind of go back to your apartment or dorm and grab what you need here. And the rest of the class, I'm going to give you all time to work on your projects. And you can just, I'm here if you have any questions for me, and I'll be around to kind of answer questions and take a look at projects here. So yeah, let's meet back at 1:15, 1:20, and then the rest of the class will be studio time for you to make progress on your work here.